Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because this is Airwindows BiquadStack. And let me just show you what this thing is. For starters, this is an advanced piece of ConsoleX. And the reason it's called BiquadStack is because it's a modification on some filters I use in that. So here we've got a frequency, level, and reso control. This is modeled after the SSL channel EQ. That being a very popular way of doing like mixed style EQing. But it's a little bit more advanced in a couple of ways because the frequency range is over pretty much the entire audible frequency range, rather than being zeroed down to only specific frequencies like bass, low mids, high mids, treble, and so on. For ConsoleX, you will get ones that are more or less tuned to what you would get out of an SSL frequency-wise. That doesn't make it an exact model, and there's a reason for that. First, let's play that rock track again, which is a good enough way to demonstrate what the EQ does. Again, frequency, you can go through the entire frequency range, and level is boost or cut. For instance, here's boost. And it can also do as good of a job at cut. Now there's a fair bit that goes into that. We've also got the reso control, and that is going to go between extremely narrow and extremely wide sounds. For instance, here's reso at 1. And reso at 0. Oh. Actually, don't mind me, I'm confusing myself by moving the level instead. I was going to sweep the frequency. So, reso at 1. And reso at 0. Again, that's set up to work the way that SSL EQs work, right down to having the reso bandwidth control operate the same way. What I got out of looking into that stuff more closely is that you typically had a simple 3-knob arrangement, but for 4 entire bands at once. And so it was made fairly understandable that you could boost things a little bit by pushing the reso a little bit clockwise, or the level a little bit clockwise, or you could push the reso a little bit clockwise, and it would do a fairly similar thing. Because what we've got here is, if you do a big boost, you can make it be narrower by turning reso down, and that lets you dial in stuff. But if you wanted to make it have more of an effect, to be more obvious, you might want to turn it up to make it be broader. And again, you can narrow it down. Or maybe cut that. Now there's a side effect to what I'm doing with it, which is the boost and cut and the reso are all kind of wildly interactive in a way that might not be what you expect. It makes it difficult to label it in a way where it says, this is the Q, this is so on, this is the frequency, because everything kind of adjusts, but the purpose of it is to get to that result where the middle controls are going to be more or less neutral. And then you can boost by making it broader, or you can boost by making it louder. if you cut, your bandwidth for the reso is actually quite a lot wider than when you boost. Because I found that if you cut, and again, if you make it narrow bandwidth, then cutting is also narrow. But it worked in such a way where if you used the same cue for the frequency, kind of like this, you go to a good wide range here. And then you went to cut, you wouldn't hear it as clearly if you went to full cut. So the idea is widening it so you can still hear what it's doing and have control over stuff, even in a fairly broad stroke level. And so that's how that works. The whole thing is to bring it into a zone where it's fairly easy to make things happen in the sound that you want to have happen in the sound. And the final thing, which is a bit of an upgrade over not hardware EQ, obviously, but a bit of an upgrade over what's going to be in ConsoleX, is this one is fully smoothed. With this one, you can do your sleepy stuff, and it works a little bit more like a synthesizer filter, where you can do it to effect. Now, that said, it's not going to ever be a resonance synthesizer filter, and in general, for stuff that is kind of that creative, that part of an instrument, I like using analog stuff for that anyhow. So this is more targeted towards the mixing console form, where you're more or less dialing in sounds and maybe doing an entire album through the sounds that you arrive at. So it's not necessarily everything is sweeping around and modulating like crazy. But here's the one where if you want to do a bunch of that, you probably don't want to do it on 4 frequencies per sound and modulate them all, because it's just so much going on. Who needs that? But this is the one where you can throw it on as an extra control and have that smoothing in there. But there's more. This is using the biquad discontinuity stuff, the stuff I got out of an old version of capacitor I made quite a while ago. And it's basically made out of a version of biquad non-lin, which is already out, but not like this. Because what's going on here is our level control is managing not 1 but 3 filters stacked up in order to get a particular kind of response. And I think this is what brings it more towards the SSL style than anything else, really. Because if you use just a simple biquad filter, or typical kinds of filters, even things like, your classic Pultec filter is not a complicated filter. So if you push it to be very resonant, like with reso being a very small number in this one, and turn it up to be really loud, you'll have a single point that is really boosted. But if you are making biquad filters out of stacking them up, it's possible to do a sharper cutoff than you would otherwise have by stacking them in a particular way, rather than having just 3 with a given Q setting and then stacking those on top of each other. What you do is you use multiple different settings in particular combinations. You use multiple different Q settings, and this reso control adapts with that, so that every step of the way, you're doing a sort of maximally steep Butterworth filter for whatever mid-range boost or cut you're doing. But the more it boosts, it's boosting a sort of, rather than a spiky kind of peak, it's a sort of wide peak instead. And that's what brings it closer to your SSL channel EQ kind of sound. That's why that sound works for people. is it's not just a resonant wah pedal. It's focusing on a whole range of frequencies and heightening them. And here's where it gets more exaggerated even than that. I can dial in, for instance, a sound where we can plainly hear what the mid-range is doing. Go a little bit so that we have this kind of tonality. And then listen to what happens as I dial it right back to 0 again, which in this case is 0.5 because it's the simple slider control. As you push less hard into the EQ, it isn't driving as hard into the nonlinearity. So you can get a hint of that sound, even though it's still fairly focused on that range. You can focus it in real nicely. But if you don't add much, it's just hinting at it in a useful way, and still retaining the focus on the frequency range we're talking about. But there's another level as well. When we push it full on, we're using the nonlinearity that's the sort of analog modeling style of these filters. But that nonlinearity scales as well, so that when you are going kind of full tilt, you're bringing more of it in. It's got more analog character. When you're not, it cleans up because you're not pushing as hard into the filter. And so there's a wide range of next to nothing being done to full crank. And the same deal for the cut. The cut goes to a level of ducking the frequencies that's the best possible way of doing that. And it's the same deal. Like, here's a duck. So we're ducking all the mid-range out, right? The lower mids. And then small adjustments are going to have a much more subtle effect. So 4 bands of that and you're really going to be rocking. And that's basically the idea here. That is BiquadStack. And again, this is all the stuff that I'm building to finish up ConsoleX and be able to put that out. And as you might imagine, there's a lot that's going to go into that. So I'm kind of doing what little bits I can while I can, and letting people have some of this stuff in advance before the big deal thing is actually out. Because I like to, and also because when I do that, you get to have this in, say, Airwindows consolidated. As long as it has less than 10 sliders, I can put it in, well, less than 11 sliders, I think. I can put it into Airwindows consolidated, and then more people can have it. It can go into the VCV rack control, although funnily enough, when you use the VCV rack version of Airwindows consolidated, I think it matters somewhat less that I'm doing the control smoothing, because you can take it down to extremely small buffer sizes. It can do like 4 samples or 8 samples at a time, or you can crank it up to do larger buffers. But this is the parametric mid control that I need to use for ConsoleX. And to go forwards with some of my other experiments, like trying to do a hit record meter, which I've been working on a whole bunch lately. And more or less, in order to do that, I have to also be able to turn around, mix a record using this meter, and show it to people and go, see, this is a hit record sound. I used the meter and it told me what to do. And then I'll have to do a bunch of live streams doing that and telling people how I do it, and put out my evergreen records, things that I've been talking about for a while, I've been recording classic records to my computer and running them through this meter for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And it's all going in a direction. And my hope is that I'll end up with exciting moments where the thing comes out and it was worth the wait. And until then, it's about putting these little chunks of the larger products out more or less one at a time, like BiquadStack here, where you get to use a piece, you get to use the parametric mids that's going to go into ConsoleX. And you'll also notice I'm calling it biquad rather than like Pro SSL parametric mid, because this is not necessarily about trying to cop somebody else's brand name, reputation, or even duplicate the exact sound. What I want to do when doing these things is figure out what about that stuff that was so desirable caused that to happen. If you had hit records such as, I don't know, AC/DC or Pink Floyd, or indeed big band music or Chuck Berry, I should be able to analyze what about that as a sound was so compelling, and maybe be able to figure out why it was so compelling, and then give you the tools to be able to do that. And that's what I'm working on. So, I don't know, it's pretty exciting. And I'll get back to work on that stuff now that I've given you BiquadStack. Again, not SSL parametric EQ, because there's no real effort made to duplicate exact tonalities of the SSL EQ. This is about figuring out that you can have like 4 parametric bands. Here's one of them at a time, but there will be more. And what it is about those parametrics that made so many hit records really kind of pop. What is it that makes it possible to dial in a voice, a sound with these things and have it really work? And that's just interesting. I'm sorry, that's just super interesting. It might be a little, people are more interested in automated AI type things to remove all resonances. And I don't know, I think that there are some mixed secrets waiting to be rediscovered. And I'm moving as fast as I can towards bringing those things to you. For today, hope you like BiquadStack, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.